Things you probably didn't know about Cleopatra. 1. Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian. She wasn't. Even though she was the queen of Egypt for some time, Cleopatra had a Macedonian Greek ancestry. She was from the family of Ptolemy Soter, who was one of Alexander the Great's generals. When Alex died, Ptolemy took Egypt, then had a thing called the Ptolemaic dynasty. It was a dynasty that kept the Greek tradition with them, and that's why Cleopatra spoke Greek. 2. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of Egypt. Cleopatra holds the title of Egypt's final pharaoh, ending the 3,000-year-long line of pharaohs. After her death, Egypt officially became a Roman province under Octavian, later known as Augustus. Her son Caesarion ruled for a few days after her death, but it didn't last because Octavian ordered his execution to eliminate any claim to the throne. Octavian had enough of the Romans being paid by the pharaohs to not conquer Egypt. Add the fact that Caesarion was only 17 when he ruled Egypt on his own. There was absolutely no shot Octavian would let that slide. 3. She was named after her ancestors. Cleopatra was the 7th woman in her family to be named Cleopatra. The name itself came from ancient Greek, meaning glory of her father. The Ptolemies, who ruled Egypt for generations, loved keeping things in the family, including names among all other things. By giving her this name, they were paying tribute to her father, Ptolemy XII, and reinforcing her connection to their Macedonian Greek ancestry. 6 other women before her carried the same name, making it an heirloom of some sort. Cleopatra VII was the last in that line, and her name symbolized her role as the final significant ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Significant because the other members of her family weren't as sensational as her. 4th, her birth name was longer. Cleopatra sounded like a mononym, like Bono or Cher or Beyoncé or Aristotle, but her name was actually longer. Her full birth name was Cleopatra Thea Philopator, which translates to Cleopatra the goddess, beloved of her father. The name reflected her divine status and the strong connection to her father, Ptolemy XII, which was key to her identity as both a ruler and a symbol of Egypt's royal lineage. The shorter version of her name, Cleopatra, became popular after her reign, but her full title carried a lot of weight during her lifetime. Besides, unless you're an Egyptian history buff, we all know who we're pertaining to with the name Cleopatra. 5. She was the first ruler to learn Egyptian. I mean, she had to. Even if the ones before her only spoke Greek, she had to learn Egyptian for strategic purposes. She did this to have better ties with many rulers in Egypt and the people in it so they remember her more. As if being one of at least 7 women pharaohs wasn't enough. 6. She married her brothers. Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV were Cleopatra's grooms. This was a Ptolemaic tradition to make sure that the bloodline was pure, by literally keeping it in the family. Cleopatra married Ptolemy XIII when he was just 10 to rule Egypt with him. Though this didn't last long because the kid's advisors forced Cleo out of ruling and it led to a civil war. When Cleopatra got her throne back, she immediately married another minor. Ptolemy XIV was 12 at the time they got married. 7. The carpet entrance. When Cleopatra got booted from her throne by Ptolemy XIII's advisors, she made a plan to meet with Julius Caesar in Alexandria to stop his younger brother. Since her brother's soldiers can stop her from directly meeting Caesar, she was rolled up in a carpet, although it's still debated if it was a carpet or a sack or a pile of cloth. But the point was for Cleopatra not to be seen by Ptolemy XIII's men. After hiding in any of these things, Apollodorus brought her to Caesar. When Cleopatra went out of the carpet, she successfully got an ally from Caesar who fell for her at first sight. 8. Cleopatra was once declared a traitor. This happened during her brother Ptolemy XIII's reign when tensions between the two rulers escalated. At the time, Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII were co-rulers of Egypt, but Cleopatra quickly sidelined her younger brother, signing official documents with only her name. This did not sit well with Ptolemy's supporters, especially his advisors, including his tutor Pothinos. They saw her as a threat to Ptolemy's authority and to the kingdom's autonomy, believing she had grown too close to Rome. So Ptolemy's advisors orchestrated a revolt against Cleopatra. With the backing of Ptolemy's loyal generals, she was ousted from Alexandria and forced to flee to Syria in 48 BC. There, Cleopatra gathered an army to reclaim her throne, but her forces alone wouldn't be enough to topple her brother, so she needed a powerful ally. Let's say hi again to Julius Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Egypt after chasing Pompey, who was assassinated by Ptolemy XIII's order, Cleopatra saw her opportunity. With Caesar's help, Cleopatra returned to Egypt and waged a civil war against Ptolemy XIII. The conflict culminated in the siege of Alexandria, where Caesar's forces triumphed. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile while trying to escape, and Cleopatra reclaimed her throne. this time as co-ruler with her younger brother Ptolemy XIV. 9. She initiated a cult for Caesar. After Julius Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra reportedly began a cult in his honor, deifying him and presenting herself as his widow and the mother of his heir, Caesarion. This helped elevate her son's status as his legitimate successor. Cleopatra initiated a cult for Julius Caesar after he became a pincushion in 44 BC. By doing this, Cleopatra promoted her son, Caesarion, as Caesar's rightful heir, strengthening his claim both in Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra likely encouraged the worship of Caesar as a god in Alexandria and connected it to her association with the goddess Isis. Cleopatra had already portrayed herself as a living embodiment of the goddess, and through this cult, she connected Caesarion to this divine lineage, further solidifying his position. Cleopatra used the cult as a political tool to boost Caesarion's legitimacy, especially given the growing tensions with Octavian. Unfortunately, Octavian saw Caesarion as a threat, and this strategy only increased his determination to eliminate any rivals to his claim as Caesar's heir. 10. She was a polyglot. Cleopatra was known to speak at least 9 languages. Her mother tongue was Koine Greek. She spoke Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, Median, Parthian, and languages in Ethiopia, and troglodytes for political purposes. Plutarch said that she had the ability to switch languages in a snap whenever she dealt with many groups at once. I can speak 4 languages, and I ain't fluent in any of them. I'm zero-lingual. Cleopatra had one hell of a tongue. 11. Product of incest. Her parents were Ptolemy XII, and you're not gonna guess it, Cleopatra the 5th. Her parents were siblings, yep, and they did incest to keep the bloodline Ptolemaic, or as the monarchs call it, royal blood. And without surprise, 2 more inbreds by the name of Cleopatra's underaged husbands, whose names I said earlier came into the world. 12th. Cleo and Mark's own frat party. This is Mark Antony, the guy who put Rome from follow the law or die to follow the leader or die type of government. He and Cleopatra partied hard. And since it was boring to have a 7-day TGIF every week with just the 2 of them, they made a club called Inimitable Livers. We know it was for politics, no actual freaking way, but the 2 just wanted to party with people more than anything. How did Cleopatra feel about this? Well, I kinda can't ask her now, nor anyone else for that matter, so moving on. 13. She was an intellectual. Cleopatra didn't spend her days just sitting on a throne. She made time to dig into subjects like chemistry, medicine, and even military strategy. She made sure she had all the knowledge needed to govern effectively. That's how serious she was about knowledge. Whether it was learning the latest breakthroughs in medicine or figuring out battle tactics to keep her kingdom safe, she was constantly leveling up her skills. Kinda makes me feel bad about rage quitting when a game gets too hard. Cleopatra was playing life on hard mode and still winning. 14. She had a way with PR. See, Cleo had a knack for exploiting the people. After all, it was femme fatale for the most part. She did a lot of PR stunts where Egyptians probably went like, whoa, she's doing so many things to people. Why are there so many people partying right now? Who's this for? Everyone? Wow, what a great leader. Are the elections upcoming? I thought pharaohs don't need to be elected. That sums up every bad politician ever, but they were right. Other than getting people on her side, Cleopatra wanted the people to see her as a divine being, and I guess parades and festivals with a little bit of freedom from tax worked so well. 15. She was a powerful woman for powerful men. Julius Caesar, carpet, secret. No way they hadn't done it. Course they did. When Caesar got turned into a pincushion in the Senate, Cleopatra knew what to do. Jump from a dead powerful man to an alive one. Again, I present to you Mark Antony from earlier. Impossible they hadn't done it yet as well. 2 partygoers often alone. What could they possibly do? Play chess? Heck no. It was a give-and-take relationship. Cleopatra gave Mark the army and money he needed to conquer all the land he saw, and Mark gave Cleopatra more land, a title of Queen of Kings, and twins. Equal trade? Probably. 16. She was a fraghead. It seems like her time was closer to Jeremy Fragrance than the building of the pyramids. Think of her as running a high-end perfume empire, and people from all corners of the world, even the Mediterranean, were hooked. Cleopatra understood that a great scent was a secret weapon of charm and power. Mixing exotic ingredients like myrrh, cinnamon, and cardamom, she practically soaked her ships with perfume so strong that people knew she was coming even before they could see her. The scent hit first, and then Cleopatra arrived. Legend has it she even owned her own perfume factory near the Dead Sea, constantly cooking up new blends. And when she met Mark Antony, yes, him again, her perfume-filled ship with purple sails sealed the deal. He maybe even did one-armed push-ups when he smelled her. 17. She wasn't really beautiful. Today's beauty standards often focus on Eurocentric features like fair skin, straight noses, blonde hair, blue eyes, and symmetrical faces. But Cleopatra didn't match those ideals. If you've seen Cleopatra portrayed by actresses like Elizabeth Taylor or Vivian Leigh, that's Hollywood's take on her. Archaeological evidence paints a different picture. Coins and sculptures show Cleopatra with a hooked nose, a sharp jawline, and a somewhat prominent chin, far from the goddess-like beauty we see. So why do we see Cleopatra as someone being incredibly beautiful? Roman propaganda did this. They exaggerated her looks to present her as a seductive and dangerous figure. Even Plutarch, a Greek historian and philosopher, wrote, "Her beauty was not in itself incomparable, nor such as to strike those who saw her." So basically, she's beautiful. On the inside. 18. Cleopatra allegedly spent 10 million sesterces on a single dinner. So there's a story where she once bet Mark Antony that she could spend 10 million sesterces on a single dinner. To give you an idea, half a sesterce could buy a loaf of bread, so you can just imagine how huge that amount was. Antony accepted the challenge, thinking there's no way any meal could cost that much. When the second course was served, Cleopatra pulled a surprise move. Instead of an extravagant dish, she had a cup of vinegar brought to the table. Cleopatra then took one of her famous pearl earrings, dropped it into the vinegar, and let it dissolve. Once the pearl disappeared, she drank the whole thing, winning the bet. The story might just probably be a myth, considering vinegar isn't usually strong enough to dissolve an entire pearl, but it certainly adds to Cleopatra's legendary status as a woman who knew how to make an impression and win a bet. 19. August is dedicated to Cleopatra. Well, sort of. This month has a connection to Cleopatra's downfall. You see, after Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, it took him a full year to fully secure his victory. He arrived in Alexandria on, guess what? Drumroll. August 1st of the following year. That month saw the end of Cleopatra. Her death marked the end of Egypt's independence, and Octavian took complete control. So why is the month of August named after the lucky winner of a war, Octavian aka Augustus? Well, Augustus considered this month his greatest triumph, as it was when he finally crushed his rivals and claimed Egypt. To honor himself, the Roman Senate named the month of Sextilis, or the 6th month of the Roman calendar, after him, and it became August. 20. Cleopatra killed her younger sister. When Arsinoe IV, Cleopatra's sister, tried to take over the throne, when her fellow inbred siblings Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII were battling it out in the Alexandrian War, Cleo wasn't having any of that anymore. So, she did the best course of action to tell Arsinoe to stop, by killing her. Cleopatra asked help from Mark Antony to hunt Arsinoe down, found her in a temple where she was hiding, and took her down then and there. So yeah, Cleopatra wasn't exactly the forgive and forget type. 22. Cleopatra's twins were named Sun and Moon. She called them Alexander Helios, meaning sun, and Cleopatra Selene, meaning moon. With names inspired by the celestial bodies, Cleopatra seemed to be making sure that even the stars revolved around her family. 23rd. She built the Caesareum. Noah made a mansion for Ali. Cleopatra took that personally and made an entire temple for Julius Caesar. Take that, Ryan Gosling! Caesareum was the name of the temple, but it was also to honor her beloved Mark Antony. I think it's a green flag or a red flag. I don't know anymore. But when Octavian got Alexandria where the temple stood, he destroyed everything that screamed Cleopatra in it, but not the Caesareum. The self-centered dude dedicated it to himself, though. 24. Cleopatra was valuable, financially. I love money, but Cleopatra took it to a whole new level. Cleopatra had coins minted with her face on them, which was pretty unusual and groundbreaking for women at the time. She even opted for strong masculine features. And while most of us just hope to look good in a selfie, Cleopatra made sure her image is on actual currency. 25. Cleopatra joined forces with Mark Antony in the Battle of Actium. The Battle of Actium started because of a family affair between Octavian and Mark Antony. Things got heated when Antony left his wife, who also happened to be Octavian's sister, to jingle the bells with Cleopatra in Egypt. Octavian didn't take that well and saw it as an excuse to paint Cleopatra as a dangerous threat. So why did Cleopatra join forces with Mark Antony? Well, simple. Survival. They both needed to defend their power and protect Egypt from falling into Octavian's angst. Cleopatra provided the ships, Antony brought the Roman soldiers, and they went all in to try and defeat Octavian, but their big plan didn't work. Cleopatra's fleet was outmaneuvered by Octavian's smaller, faster ships. When the battle turned south, Cleopatra decided it was time to bounce, and Antony followed her retreat. That was the beginning of the end. Well, technically the Battle of Actium was the beginning of the end, but you get the point. 26. Cleopatra's tomb was never found. "No man will ever find my tomb." Rumor has it that Cleopatra said this, and until now, literally no one has concrete evidence of finding her tomb. The closest someone got to her tomb was a woman. So it's just fitting with her quote-unquote quote. Despite many attempts to locate it, the exact location of their tomb remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Some believe it could be hidden near Alexandria, while others think it is lost under the sea, and Ariel is dancing around it. No matter if it's a man, woman, or an Apache war helicopter who gets to find her tomb, we'll be waiting. 27. She increased the silver content in coins to combat inflation. So Cleopatra's rule wasn't all pyramids and sphinxes. Those were both before her time. Nor was it all sunshine and rainbows. Just like any other pharaoh, Cleo's Egypt was spiraling for years on the currency side of things, with special thanks to everyone who ruled prior to her. So what she did was make coins that had a more concentrated portion of silver. They were called silver tetradrachms, and surprise, the final product of the coins had Cleopatra's face printed on it as a power move. And speaking of power, more silver in the coins meant more value. More value meant a stronger purchasing power for each coin, and this controlled the inflation in Egypt. Bottom line, the coins made in Cleopatra's time were basically the biggest middle finger she could give to Romans and men, while saying, "See these? Yeah, I just saved the economy. And I'm a woman. What was that about a patriarchal system again? Sorry I can't hear you over the clinking coins with more silver and my face on it." 28th. Cleopatra showed tolerance towards various religions. Whether it was Greek or Roman or Egyptian belief, Cleopatra never crusaded her ideologies and shoved it into people's mouths. They who believed in things different from hers were no different than those who did, at least in her eyes, all for the sake of her queendom not imploding on itself. Besides, a whole bunch of them back in the hieroglyphs era linked Greek gods to Egyptian ones because the Ptolemaic dynasty was something that Greeked its way to Egypt, like how Zeus was associated with Amun-Ra and Aphrodite to Isis. There might have been some other religions that Cleopatra welcomed with arms wide open that we don't know about, but come on. Less than 1% of ancient Egypt is discovered up to this day, and there is so much more to find. 29. Cleopatra was portrayed as a sorceress by Roman propaganda. The Roman propaganda that was led by Octavian put Cleopatra in a bad image. You see these two? These were Plutarch and Dio Cassius. You'll see that even as a writer, Plutarch was a tad bit fickle-minded on how he wanted to show Cleopatra to the public. Here, he and Cassius painted her as this seductive succubus who used sorcery to get what she wanted from the powerful men she quote-unquote manipulated, like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. All of this was done to discredit all of the influence she had in her time and to make her look like this foreigner who slept her way to victory. Going the distance was not an issue for the Romans, as they compared Cleopatra to Medea, a tragic story. So Octavian took this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to present himself as the savior of Rome, with the goal of conquering Egypt and taking Cleopatra down. 30. She promoted the Egyptian papyrus industry. So if you search for a papyrus today, you might come across this. I mean, that's also papyrus, but just to be clear, we're talking about this papyrus, the ancient Egyptian kind. Papyrus, made from the papyrus plant, was used for everything from writing materials to everyday goods like baskets and ropes. Cleopatra understood how valuable this resource was, not just within Egypt, but across the Mediterranean, where it was a prized export. By promoting the production and trade of papyrus, Cleopatra kept Egypt's economy when Rome was becoming a big threat. Cleopatra knew that growing the papyrus industry was a good investment, so she dabbled on that not only for the sake of papyrus just being the paper of the time, but also for economic reasons. 31. Titles. Cleopatra collected titles like GBE, KBE, CBE, PhD, and some other royal flush of titles. Aside from being a pharaoh, she also earned titles like Queen of Kings and Mistress of Two Lands, and each name carried weight. As Mistress of Two Lands, she ruled both Upper and Lower Egypt, a title passed down from pharaohs who united the country, which I initially thought was for Rome and Egypt, since, well, yeah. But as it turns out, the one for that was Queen of Kings, and it came after she formed powerful alliances with Marky and Joe to show that her influence stretched beyond Egypt. Cleopatra also adopted the title Thea Philopater, meaning goddess beloved of her father, because of her divine association and filial piety. 32nd, her childhood tutor, Philostratos, was a respected philosopher and orator. Under his wing, Cleopatra learned Greek arts like overthinking, the art of not letting other people answer your questions, and unlimited political yapping. This early education laid the foundation for how she ruled Egypt when her time came, and it allowed her to flaunt herself as a pharaoh with a brain. It's not like everyone before her didn't have one, they just didn't use theirs the way Cleopatra did. 33rd, Cloak of Gold. Cleopatra was known for her rich and symbolic clothing, with one of her most famous pieces being a gold cloak. This cloak was made to look like the wings of a phoenix, which symbolized rebirth and immortality. It was made from thin strips of gold leather and decorated with thousands of tiny beads and sequins, making it shine brightly. By wearing this, not only did she get to be a fashion icon among pharaohs, but she probably could also say Azarath Metrion Zinthos without us knowing and then banish us all to wherever. 34. Cleopatra bathed in sour milk. Straight up fermented, spoiled, foul-smelling milk. This is her iconic beauty ritual. She'd get her hands on gallons of the stuff, all soured up and probably stinking to high heaven, and climb in for a nice curdled soak. Supposedly, the lactic acid in that sour milk was meant to keep her skin smooth. Cleopatra figured it was better to marinate in milk that had curdled, just letting her skin soak in those weird, goopy acids. The process was ridiculous. She probably had entire herds of cows on hand, their milk left to sit until it was rancid enough for her taste, all just so she could sit around in it for a couple of hours, letting that sourness do its thing. And guess who got the joy of prepping that smelly setup? That's right, probably a small army of servants dedicated to hauling milk, letting it go bad, and pouring it into the royal tub setup she had going on. What a blast of a job, huh? Lactic acid was Cleopatra's holy grail to a smooth skin. 35. Another thing Cleopatra smothered herself with. She had a whole greasy lineup of oils she smeared on herself like it was the last day on earth. Castor oil, sesame oil, moringa oil. She was slathering on anything that promised to fight off wrinkles or keep her skin from sagging. Cleopatra was coating herself with enough oil to make a salad. Every oil had its own supposed benefit. Castor oil was supposed to keep her skin smooth and clear, moringa to restore elasticity, and sesame oil to keep everything hydrated, which is rich because Egypt is dry. Sure, now you can buy all these in tiny bottles at health stores, but Cleopatra was going through them by the gallon. She practically invented skincare overload. With all these skincare regimens, she didn't get a pass from aging, but she didn't end up wrinkle-free forever. 36. Orator, Cleopatra. Cleopatra, orator. She knew how to handle a crowd, knew how to manipulate her words to get exactly what she wanted, and she did it in Greek and Egyptian. Unlike most rulers who had people speak for them, Cleopatra handled her own speeches. She didn't need some royal spokesperson fluffing things up. She went out there and said it all herself. People were probably so taken by her sharp mind and confidence that they'd just go along with whatever she was pitching. Cleopatra knew that words were just as powerful as armies. She could twist them to win a crowd or cut down an opponent without lifting a damn finger. That's one way to rule a kingdom. No swords, just a sharp tongue. 37th. Cleopatra helped secure her father's return. When Cleopatra was still young, her father, Ptolemy XII, was forced into exile in 58 BC after facing backlash from the Egyptian people, all because of his dependence on Rome and unpopular tax policies. While he was gone, her older sister, Berenice IV, took over as queen, but Ptolemy XII was so desperate to get his throne back. So he reached out to Rome for help, and Cleopatra played an important role behind the scenes. So to accomplish this, Ptolemy XII sought Roman military and political support. Although we don't know the exact details of Cleopatra's involvement, it's believed she helped by aligning with Roman interests, just as her father had done. Cleopatra understood early on that Roman support was key to maintaining the throne, and she may have acted as a diplomat to strengthen ties with Rome. Also, her knowledge of politics and her family's connections to Roman leaders likely helped facilitate negotiations for military aid. With help from Aulus Gabinius, a Roman general, and money from Rome, Ptolemy XII got his throne back in 55 BC after Berenice IV was removed and executed. Cleopatra might have acted as a key negotiator, using her father's connections with Rome to make sure he returned. In return for Rome's help, Ptolemy XII made Egypt even more dependent on them, leaving Cleopatra with a clear understanding that Roman favor was so important for maintaining power in Egypt. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BC, Cleopatra started her career with a minor. 38th. Cleopatra restored temples. Cleopatra knew that temples were a big deal in Egypt, both for religious and political reasons. So she took on several restoration projects to keep the gods in her favor and boost her image. One of her most famous efforts was the Temple of Dendera, where she had herself and her son Caesarion carved into the walls as divine figures. Then she also restored the Temple of Isis at Philae, a sacred place dedicated to the goddess Isis. Cleopatra invested in bringing this temple back to life, making sure it remained a center of religious activity. The Temple of Isis was especially important because Isis was seen as the protector of pharaohs, and by restoring this temple, Cleopatra aligned herself with that protection. This was her way to keep Egypt's priesthood on her side and maintain the people's loyalty. 39. She had a death cult. When Cleopatra died, the Egyptian mythologies portrayed her as this highly respected figure during her lifetime. Well, they weren't wrong for that. Egyptians put her on a pedestal, worshipping her like a god, just like how every pharaoh before her was put on the same Mount Olympus. But the same could not be said for the Romans. Instead of seeing her as this human-turned-divine post-mortem personality, she was seen as a tragedy. All that affair with Mark Antony was particularly one that Roman writers loved to make stories about. Some say that Romeo and Juliet might have been inspired by these two. 40. Cleopatra used henna for all sorts of things. Basically, anything she wanted to color or tattoo up, she slapped henna on it. Hair? Henna. Nails? Henna. Hands and feet? Yep, henna. That reddish-brown dye was Cleopatra's way of jazzing up anything that she thought looked too dull. Not just that, henna was supposed to protect hair from damage and keep it shiny. Cleopatra probably had her servants grinding henna leaves, mixing that earthy-smelling paste, and rubbing it in her hair all day. Cleopatra's obsession with henna was pure vanity. She wanted to look like a queen, literally, and if that meant painting herself from head to toe, she went for it. I mean, this video is one big did you know video, so this is the end. Just turning black.